Welcome back to Block TV. It's time now for Stress Test. And in the crypto sphere, the two biggest drivers seem to be fear and greed. With emotions running the show, there is a serious need for the industry to develop more accurate metrics. Fortunately, we have a man who can help us to understand how things are seen from a new perspective. The Thai co-founder Joshua Frank, whose proprietary sentiment data breaks down how the millions of people who make up the crypto sphere feel about where the markets are headed. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. All right, so first up, you've got something quite interesting for us, I understand, a bit of a geographic breakdown of sentiment data over the whole crypto sphere. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so after I was on the show a couple of weeks ago, it was suggested that I look at trying to figure out where conversations on Libra are coming from. So as we went in and we started looking geographically at conversations around crypto, we decided to go more broad and started with Bitcoin. And we were really interested to find that 50% of Bitcoin tweets are coming from the US and the UK, with 39% coming from the US and 11% from the UK. So what we did was we mapped geographically where tweets are coming from. So this is with the US and UK there, and the blacker the country is, the higher the tweet volume. It's unbelievable the percentage of tweets that are coming from the United States. So we actually had to remove the US and the UK, so you can get a more broad view of the world and where tweets are coming from. And what we've seen is that the countries that have the most tweet volume on Bitcoin are the US, the UK, Canada, Turkey, India, and Australia. And but there are tweets coming from 160 plus different countries. So after kind of looking at where tweets were coming from, we decided to look at a few different coins. So a coin that we looked at, for example, is a coin that's been gaining significant steam, which is Chainlink, which has quickly moved into the top 20 largest by market cap and has become the 5th most discussed coin on Twitter. What we saw with Chainlink was that the Netherlands was actually the 2nd most discussed country. So it does differ from coin to coin, but for the most part, this map is pretty reflective more broadly. But after looking at the countries themselves and where these conversations are coming from, we decided to go a step further and look at which countries were actually most positive or negative when discussing cryptocurrencies. So we found, which was interesting, was that the most positive countries were countries that you may not necessarily associate with Bitcoin at first, which were Peru, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Italy. But the number one most negative country was actually Venezuela, and that's something that we really did not expect to see, with 62% of tweets from Venezuela being negative. I think broadly about 59 to 60% of crypto tweets were positive. Within the US, 62% were positive. But Venezuela actually had 62% of tweets being negative, which was something that was quite shocking to us.
Well, I got to say, yeah, fascinating data there, Joshua. I got to ask though, I suppose in one element, obviously China itself, for example, not as big a users of Twitter, far more likely to use their own internal mechanisms. Does that, you think, have an impact on perhaps who's tweeting so much about it, that there's just more Twitter investment, more Twitter infrastructure going on in the United States, for example?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think, for example, EOS, we don't see a lot of tweets about, and my understanding is that there is a significantly larger number of Twitter conversations going on sorry, not Twitter, I mean conversations more generally, whether on WeChat or Weibo or whatever Chinese media platform that are going on within those countries. But what was really interesting to look at was not necessarily the number of conversations, which were interesting, but where those conversations were most positive and negative. And as I'd mentioned, Venezuela was a country where conversations were not as positive. And another coin that we looked at was Libra, which had, last time I came on about a couple of weeks ago, was completely dominating the headlines, was dominating conversation levels. But we've seen that Libra tweet volumes across the board, across every country, have been on the decline. And what was pretty interesting to us was seeing that sentiment on Libra within specific countries which were having regulatory pushback, like the United States and France, was significantly less than other countries like the United Kingdom.
Interesting to see that drop in the Libra factor. But of course, speaking of drops as well, while we're talking about these big geographic issues within the market as a whole, we've saw a big dip in Bitcoin over the last week and now a bit of a recovery. How does that play out in the sentiment data, and what are we seeing there?
Sure. So the kind of at a highest level, we think that dip is purely a correction. If you look at this graph here, the blue line is daily sentiment, which looks at conversations on Twitter today versus the last 7 days. So a score above 50 would show that Twitter conversations are more positive than they had been over the last week. So what we saw is that on the 26th at 3:10 p.m. Eastern, sentiment hit its highest peak just a few seconds before price and dove down. As you can see, price moving down, and price bounced around a little bit, whereas sentiment stayed negative. But I think on July 1st or 2nd, sentiment began to rebound. You can also see on the bottom, there's another blue line next to those gray bars. The gray bars are trading volume. The blue line on the bottom is tweet volume, and we can see that tweet volume on the 26th peaked at about 70,000 tweets a day, and that correlates very strongly with Libra and conversations around Libra and Bitcoin mooning, for lack of better terms, and it has since decreased back down to about 30,000. So looking at it up close, it may not look as great, but if we look at a longer term trends, it paints a much rosier picture. So in this case, the purple line on the bottom is long-term sentiment, and that measures conversations on Twitter over the last 50 days versus a 200-day moving interval. And what we've seen is since December 2018, sentiment on Bitcoin has moved up every single month. It continues to grow. And what our belief is that, Libra coin and hitting 10,000 got a lot of people really excited. The price drove up, moved up way too fast, and we were due for a bit of a correction. And I think some of the regulatory pushback on Libra may be, in part the reason for this correction, but I don't think that it's going to have any long-term impact on the coin.
It's very interesting to see how that plays out over the longer term. It does really, when put in perspective, just look like a dip in an otherwise very exciting and powerful run. We'll have to see if that does indeed play out. And now, just very quickly, Joshua, we've got some interesting information, I believe, on Bitcoin SV. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so can share a couple more graphs here. So with Bitcoin SV has seen a massive run up, and some people have been asking whether or not sentiment is behind this run up. We took a look at tweet volumes on Bitcoin SV, and red line is tweet volumes, the blue line is price. We can actually see that there was a slight peak in tweet volumes prior to this run up from about $50 up to almost $250 in Bitcoin SV. We can also see that sentiment, which is the red bars in this graph, also ran up prior to Bitcoin SV jumping up from $50 to about $250. We'd love to say that our sentiment data is amazing and our sentiment data called for this, but I still do think there's a lot of manipulation behind Bitcoin SV. If we're actually looking at conversation levels in that last graph that I had shown, in the past they were about 750 tweets a day. We're down, last I checked this morning, to about 189 Bitcoin SV tweets a day. So the conversations are decreasing, and they're coming from a small group of people. And then if we look at price movement on Bitcoin SV, what we saw was that on May 30th, 2019, there was a $25,000 market sale on Bitfinex, which dropped the price from $240 to $44 within minutes, and dropped the coin overall by about 13%. So there isn't any liquidity here. I think the exchanges which have the highest reported trading volumes on Bitcoin SV are ZBG, Coinbene, and IDCM, and we've done a lot of research on market manipulation in the past, and those exchanges are all reporting 1,000% more volume or more than they actually are, they actually have over their network. So we think this is a small group of actors, of bad actors that are manipulating trading volumes. And even in the last 30 days, we've seen Bitcoin SV decrease 40.5% versus the price of Bitcoin.
Well, it does certainly seem like it's a bit of a graveyard going on there, and does, I suppose, reek of potential manipulation in the market. Well, I want to thank you so much, Joshua Frankfurt, there for breaking down this fascinating sentiment data and seeing the story that's going on behind the scenes, what we can read in the data of what's happening around the cryptoverse. Joshua Frank from The Tie, thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you again next week. And of course, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in Bitcoin news and data. Catch it all here. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.